This is Hobby Talks, a podcast series exploring politics and policy-focused conversations with experts, scholars, and those guiding the most complex issues facing our region and state. This podcast is a production from the Hobby School of Public Affairs in partnership with the Center for Student Media at the University of Houston. In this episode, Hobby Talks host Jim Granado discusses how social media and artificial intelligence are reshaping democracy, civic discourse, and the media political landscapes with Siva Vaidhyanathan.
Welcome to Hobby Talks. I'm your host, Jim Granado, Dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. In this episode, I'm joined by cultural historian and media scholar Siva Vaidhyanathan to discuss how social media platforms and the rapid shift towards artificial intelligence shape our democracy and society. Professor Vaidhyanathan is the Robertson Professor of Media Studies and Director of the Center for Media and Citizenship at the University of Virginia. He is the author of several influential books, including Anti-Social Media and the Googleization of Everything. And he is a frequent contributor to national conversations about the evolving digital landscape. He is at the University of Houston to deliver a public lecture for the Elizabeth D. Rockwell Center on Ethics and Leadership. So let's get started.
Yeah.
And welcome.
Thanks, Jim.
Social media platforms are engineered to maximize engagement and attention. From your perspective, how has this reshaped our news consumption?
Yeah, pretty much top to bottom, right? Think about this. Before we were able to monitor and thus monetize how much attention any of us paid to any particular piece of content, it was guesswork, right? It was guesswork. So if you got the newspaper in the morning, it was filled with news from Moscow, news from Cairo, news from Washington, news from Austin, news from your community, and a bridge column and a chess column and comics and sports. But nobody knew which of those things you were spending all your time on, and nobody knew which of those things you were ignoring. So the people who made the decisions of what goes into the newspaper basically could just fill it, knowing that if at least one thing mattered to enough people, they were going to sell the newspaper and they didn't have to watch it too closely. But now, because everybody who produces content and everybody who produces advertisements that sit next to that content know everything we're doing, that disaggregates that whole decision. And that has revealed things that aren't that surprising, right? We love gossip. We love strong emotions, right? And so what we now have is an entire media system tuned to reward our inclinations to experience powerful emotions in a whole range, right? From like joy and fun and dancing and sex and music to hate speech and indignation and violence, right? And given that panoply, right, it's easy to manipulate us, easier than ever. Now, let's be clear. We don't really fully understand how things like propaganda work, but we do know that to the extent to which propaganda works, it's so much easier to do and to execute when you actually know everything about the people you're trying to influence.
So let's drill down a little bit more on this.
Yeah.
Is this a crisis of technology, crisis of democracy, or a crisis of how institutions respond to change?
Right. D, all the above. Okay. Right. So, I see when I'm about to turn 60. So I've been watching the scene since Watergate. Right. So, and not just this scene, like I'm watching the world. There was a point in my life when I thought the Cold War was never going to end. Right. And given all of that change, it's hard for me to just say, this is about the last 8 years, 12 years, 10 years, 25 years. This moment we're in right now, and I think it's really clear that in terms of those of us who are fans of democracy, this is a crisis around the world. We have to look at multiple factors that are deep, social, economic, religious. I would say all of these changes have been amplified and modified by our communication technologies. But the communication technologies are never at the root. All of these systems are what we in my area of the academy call socio-technical systems. They don't exist outside of society. They don't exist outside of culture, politics, economics, and yet they are not invisible or neutral, right? They still have influences. So if you have something like Google is designed to encourage certain behaviors and discourage other behaviors. Facebook, same way. Some behaviors, other behaviors. And what those are, we can get into later. But given that, it doesn't mean that we as sentient, independent humans can't make our own decisions about how to interact with them and what to put on them. But some things are going to fly easier than other things, right? And it turns out in all these systems, again, the things that spike strong emotions fly, whether that's puppies and kittens and little babies, or it's, anti-Semitism or anti-immigrant feelings, like that stuff that gets a reaction, whether that reaction is positive or negative, is going to fly better in our current media environment. Now, what does that do? For those of us who believe in democracy, who like the idea of deep deliberation about serious issues of public concern, where's the space for that? Where's the hope for that? Right?
The rise of short form, I should say, social media content, which you're just talking about, helped propel figures like Zoran Mamdani into the spotlight by allowing them to connect directly with voters. What distinguishes digital outreach that generally builds trust and civic engagement from content that chases attention or outrage?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like, I was trained as a historian, and so I like to think about what has been stable and what has been changing, right? And when I look at the humor and sort of community-based and optimism that someone like Mamdani puts out in his Instagram feed, I am reminded of no one more than FDR, who used like short campaign songs, some of them really kitschy, most of them catchy as well, but fun and humorous. And he and his people and the people who supported him produced all kinds of short form songs that were just like sung and played as he campaigned. Happy Days Are Here Again is the one we know the most. But that style of like culturally engaged energy and optimism is not new. The medium through which Mamdani put that stuff out is fairly new, but not new to him, right? So we've seen people like Narendra Modi use techniques similarly in India. We have seen other candidates of all sorts of points on the political spectrum use these sorts of techniques. I'm blanking on his name, but oh my gosh, I'm blanking. He's the new president of Indonesia. He used to be a Suharto guy. He's like this grandfather who was actually like in charge. I mean, this is all going to be cut, but like he was this like elderly grandfather who in the 70s was in charge of like a lot of death camp stuff. But he ran for president and won on the strength of young voters because he did all of this TikTok and Instagram stuff that was just kind of fun. Like he's a goofy old grandfather, and none of the young people
they didn't know about his past.
No, right. If they knew about it, they didn't think about it. Right. And if you're experiencing, anyway, this is a big diversion. It's not going to work for your audience, but, no, I mean, I mentioned Modi, I would say, so look, a lot of people have used these sorts of techniques around the world in the last decade or two. So it's not new. Some people do it better than others. And look, that's, there are lots of ways to win elections. That's one of the ways to win an election or to influence a win of an election. What I'm mostly concerned about is whether there's more there, whether there's, again, room for substance, room for deep deliberation. My big concern with our current media moment is the oxygen is sucked out of the room when it comes to those institutions and habits that allow for deep, serious examination of the problems we really have. Now, so you look at New York City, right? One of the problems is traffic and public transportation. Mamdani had a serious policy proposal, but he also had a way of selling it through Instagram. and TikTok, and closing that gap's good. Now, have New Yorkers had the opportunity to deeply consider and deliberate on the costs and benefits of free buses? I don't know. I don't live in New York. I hope that there is room for that. And that is the big question.
Yes.
Because in the absence of that, we are simply going to be manipulated by whoever makes the coolest video.
Right, right. So the hobby school community fosters conversations on policy challenges through research, survey findings, and public lectures and events. What advice would you give students who want to engage in serious conversations about complex and often contentious issues?
Yeah, I would say double down on the institutions that still do facilitate deep conversation, deep deliberation. Universities being, I think, the best place in America to do this sort of stuff, even now, even though we're under so much pressure, especially at public universities that are under political pressure. Look, universities like the University of Houston, universities like the University of Virginia, where I work, we host these conversations constantly. They're open to the public, and we do our best to connect the public and the public interest to the universities and their events, right? We don't want to be separate from our communities. None of us do. And these institutions, that's not the whole list, of course, to the extent to which we still have public media, those institutions, radio and television, often produce and promote these moments of engagement, these moments of deep deliberation. We should understand that religious organizations are often deeply embedded in our community concerns, and they host events that take on a lot of important issues, whether it's local school issues or international issues, international human rights issues, right? Those are all discussed in our religious institutions. Our museums, our parks, our other public forums. We need to have more of those. We need to celebrate them more. Our libraries are amazing places for public deliberation and public events. I think those are the temples of democracy more than any other institution. And I think if we valued them more and paid more attention to them and didn't pressure them to pander to the moment, we might have a much stronger democratic culture.
Let's shift gears a little bit. So let's talk about you're in the classroom often. So we're talking about AI and how it's impacting things.
Oh boy!
What challenges and opportunities does this present to higher education?
Yeah,
and how educators teach critical thinking, writing, and civic responsibility.
Yeah. Look, in 2022, when ChatGPT showed up in all of our classrooms, we were like canaries in a coal mine. Like all of a sudden, we're like, wow. This isn't, putting aside the whole question of like academic honesty and dishonesty, which is a whole important issue, no doubt. But the long-term question for those of us who are educators was, how can we educate? How can students learn if they are not reading and writing? Because, of course, these large language models also undermine reading as much as writing. They digest stuff and they churn out things to us in small forms that you can think of as note-taking. But, one of the things we all know as educators is the process of taking in a long, deep, complicated piece of work and doing the digestion ourselves is learning, right? And the process of rearranging those ideas in our own words is learning. And, so basically reading and writing are the core skills of how our minds operate at their best. I don't think anyone has disproved that, even in a world of ubiquitous video, even in a world of AI. The way to actually understand something and prove you understand it and manipulate it to your own benefit and to the benefit of others is to read and to write. I know it sounds very 15th century, but I don't think we've found anything better. Yeah. I'm open to being challenged on the question. But so, look, there's a problem in all of our classrooms. We're all struggling. How do we convince our students that they should be doing the hard stuff and not going for the easy answer when everything in society, all the signals of society tell people, especially young people, get through it fast, get through it with the best grades, get the credential, get the work done, right? That it's all about productivity, as if that's the prime value. And for those of us in the classroom, well, we have pressures of productivity too. The reason we did these jobs is we think there are values that are more important than productivity. Values like deep thought, exploration, critical thinking, or just thinking.
Yeah,
critical or not.
I'll take that.
Yeah,
I'll just take that.
And being able to interact with other human beings in a sophisticated way, an open way, a way that allows for people to change their mind, be persuaded, learn new things, not go for the quick and easy answer to everything, right? So if efficiency and productivity are our prime values, we have to make space for other values. And that is my biggest fear here. I'm much more worried about society and democracy in general than I am worried about my classroom, but I am worried about my classroom. It's been a huge headache. Do I have an answer? I've done the sort of things everybody's trying to do. Go back to the 20th century with blue books and making my classroom tech free. I've tried that. I've tried multiple choice exams for my big lecture classes. None of it satisfying. There's a really good reason why we all shifted to take home writing with, lots of incremental steps to help our students think through the writing process. We spent 25 years or more trying to build those skills into our classes. And now we're suddenly undoing all of that,
right.
And going back to the way that you and I had to do college in the 20th century. And that wasn't that great, frankly. Like
right.
we were so much better at teaching and learning in the 21st century through a lot of these new techniques. And now we're abandoning them. And it's just, I don't have an answer.
Do you see, so in the classroom, I'm much more, so with the writing assignments I give, I do memos. So, but they're also so, what's the word? They're drilled, they're so specific that I see AI is just helping lit reviews. But in terms of thinking, and you have to write persuasive essays. So I still see AI as a possible issue.
Right.
But for exams, I see it less of a threat because you have to remember the material. And I get AI can help you study, but I don't see how you still have to grasp material with an exam. So I see it as less of a threat with exams, but maybe you don't. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot depends on the structure of one's exams, right? Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, one of the things that large language models allow people to do is synthesize information that they've never read. Because it exists in the archive, right? So it's easy to fake memory that way too, right?
Good point.
I mean, Google searches could do that for us for decades too, which is, always a risk. But I just see like so many little aids to productivity, which cost us. Every aid to productivity costs something. And in this case, it really costs in atrophy, mental atrophy, I think. And it's tiny, it's incremental, right? It's not like we're dealing with undergraduate students who can't think. It's just they haven't been challenged to think as much as the students 5 years earlier. Okay. And what I worry about now is like we just get, those of us who teach undergrads right now, just got through those who missed a year of high school from COVID.
Yes.
And that's really when everything was messed up.
Yeah.
And then ChatGPT came right after that, right?
Exactly.
So that combination has been terrible for the last 4 years of undergraduate education. And now we're hitting the students who missed 8th grade and 7th grade and 6th grade. And what that means is they have had 4, 6, 7 years of using large language models to get through classes in high school, because this is a bigger problem for high school teachers than it is for university professors. Right. We have labs, we have oversight, we have seminars, right? But your average high school teacher in America is teaching 30 to 40 students a lot all day, like just trying to get through the day. No time to experiment, no ability to experiment, right? So as university professors, we might actually find a way to incorporate this stuff in productive ways. I'm not convinced, but like that, at least we're trying, right? High school teachers have no such freedom or security or time. And I'm really worried about high school more than college.
Right. As a former journalist, what guidance would you offer students on how to approach negative or high emotion news or content in today's media environment?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, we're having this conversation the day after the Washington Post laid off more than half of its news gathering staff and closed down all of its foreign bureaus. Like the Washington Post, one of the leading newspapers in the history of the world, will no longer cover the war in Ukraine, will no longer cover Gaza, will no longer cover our conflicts with South America. Like, it's stunning. It's
the
really
days
stunning.
of Katharine Graham are over.
Oh, I mean, the days of last week were over.
Bradley.
In fact, the Washington Post, through all of this turmoil over the last couple of years, has produced some amazing work. Right, the January 6th, 2021 riots were covered best by their local paper. Yeah. The Washington Post had sources in the Capitol Police, had sources in the staff, right? Everyone lived next door to the people who worked in the Capitol complex. And the ways they were able to tell that story and reveal what had really gone on that day was not only Pulitzer Prize winning, but like essential to the historical record. Right. If we were to have such an event next week in our nation's capital, no one could cover it like that. There would be no local coverage of it with that kind of depth. Watergate was a local crime story for weeks before someone figured out that Howard Hunt at the White House was involved through a weird memo, right? So we never would have found out, not never, because the New York Times would have eventually caught up to Watergate, but it would not have been the same story in the same way with the same pressures had not two young journalists on the weekend shift caught the memo that there had been a break-in. And that the Washington D.C. police found it odd that there was an H Hunt -WH on a memo in one of the burglars' pockets, right? So those are the sorts of things that we're going to lose. Now, what does that mean to young people in America who want to be responsible citizens? It's that much harder for us to find the broccoli among the potato chips, that's, and I think that's really what we're talking about. Like, you can't live on potato chips alone, right? You can't be a full, engaged, healthy person with just junk food. It's just going to be harder to find the stuff. It exists, right? We still have, and we probably will have, lots of smart people writing deep, long things about important issues. It's just not going to end up flowing by your phone screen very easily. And it hasn't been for 25 years, right? This is not a new phenomenon. It's just going to get harder as institutions like the Washington Post dismantle themselves. You're just going to have to look out more stuff for subscribe to the Atlantic, subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. It's just going to take that much more effort. You got to subscribe to the Houston Chronicle. It's been decimated as well. It has less than half the staff it did 20 years ago, but nobody else is covering Houston with any depth. Nobody else is talking about, how the growth of Fort Bend County and how that is going to affect traffic or how that's going to affect taxes, right? Those are issues that everybody around here should care about. And the only place you're going to get that is the Houston Chronicle, even if you're not going to get it like you used to.
Right. Yeah, the Hobby family owned the Houston Post.
That's right.
And they sold, I think, in the 80s.
Yeah.
And part of it was because of the readership and it was declining.
Right,
That's been a trend that's been on for quite a while.
That's right. Yeah. And then Paul Hobby owned Texas Monthly for a while.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Paul Hobby, who is a University of Virginia alumnus, actually.
he's reminding me of that.
Right.
As is his sister. And also multiple children, nieces, and nephews.
I'm a huge fan of the Hobby family. When I was a reporter in Austin, Bill Hobby was lieutenant governor.
Wow.
And so I covered him quite a bit and got to know him quite well and got to know his staff quite well. And,
So you knew Sarah Lee Teedy?
Oh, yeah. I remember Sarah Lee very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. She actually ran the state of Texas, I have to say. I mean, now that Governor Hobby's gone, I can say, that she actually ran the state of Texas. So, Texas has changed so much since then. That notion of having that sort of responsible civic engagement, even among powerful people, seems to be gone from our public deliberations. So,
Yeah. I mean, there's a recent book about Bill Hobby. It was, it goes, a lot of it's about his terms in office, but there's his childhood, all of it's in it. Everything's in there.
I'd love to read that.
I'll get you a copy.
Yeah, right.
And any event, what's interesting is how many Republicans he worked with, even to the point of having people in his own party get mad at him, and he didn't care because he trusted these people and he just wanted things done.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. And they just, what an example.
I mean, he was the LBJ of Texas in so many ways, right? A guy who just made sure everything worked.
Yeah.
And look, public education and higher education got so much better during his terms of office because he cared deeply about those things. He made sure that Republicans and Democrats were all on board with that. He made sure that those issues were top of the agenda. When Ross Perot started a commission to fix Texas high schools, it was Governor Mark White, Lieutenant Governor Bill Hobby, who basically gave Ross Perot the freedom and confidence to come up with some what were then very unpopular ideas that were not going to help Texas football.
No pass, no play.
Right, but we're going to help Texas education. And that those years, right, the 1980s and 90s were years of great improvements at Texas high schools and universities. And it breaks my heart that we've lost that momentum and lost that spirit.
Yeah. Shift gears a little bit to podcasting and streaming.
Yeah.
And something that's really, I think, just relatively recent in my mind is we have long form now, long-term content. So you got people like Joe Rogan and Hassan Piker.
Yeah.
They're reaching millions of people. I mean, Joe Rogan had Donald Trump on for 3 hours.
Yeah.
But he has probably, during the week, he probably has 4 guests. And you're looking at 2 to 3 hour interviews, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
So how is that reshaping political discourse, especially in younger audiences? And what does this shift mean for traditional journalism and democratic deliberation?
Yeah. Okay. So my thoughts about Joe Rogan are complicated in terms of format, in terms of medium, right? As someone who is sort of, one of my sort of intellectual backgrounds is this field of study called media ecology, where we think about the structure and technology and technological elements of media, and think about how that affects our daily lives without necessarily focusing on the content. And when I look at something like Joe Rogan's multimedia presence, I think that there's something to be both studied and celebrated in that. First of all, it puts to rest this pervasive myth that we have an attention crisis, right? That we're incapable, especially young people are incapable of paying attention for hours at a time. Given that so many of my students stay up all night playing video games, I've known that to be true for a long time, right? I mean, that anybody could burn through an 8-part Netflix series in an afternoon shows me that attention spans are not a problem.
Right.
But we have more competition for our attention than ever before. And some of the stuff tastes more like potato chips and broccoli, right? Now, where does Joe Rogan sit on the potato chips to broccoli scale? I mean, when you then look at the content, what he's actually doing, I think it's closer to potato chips and broccoli. I think it's not as deep or informed as it could be. He's not a person who does research, right?
He's not William Buckley doing firing line.
Exactly, right? William Buckley, I think, not one of my heroes, but there was a guy who actually read the book of the person who was coming on and asked hard questions and allowed that person to extrapolate and defend him or herself at that point, right? And Rogan doesn't really do that. Rogan approaches every conversation with "gee whiz," right? Like, "Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's awesome," and therefore it's engaging, it's fun, and sometimes there are real ideas being put out there. I think he's creating an interesting historical record of our moment, given that so many influential people have appeared on his show for long periods of time. And right, it's if you really want to know the mess that is Elon Musk's mind, he expresses it best on Joe Rogan's interviews. At the same time, what is that doing for civic discourse? I don't think it's healthy, largely because I think it's pretty shallow stuff. In so many ways, Joe Rogan is deeply misinformed, deeply misguided. I think he's led people astray on issues of health. I think he's led people astray on issues of civil liberties and issues of economic policy. And it's because he just doesn't do his homework, right? Now he's a really smart guy. He's just doing too much, and he's not doing the homework, and I mean, he's not likely to call me and ask me for advice. And who am I to tell this, like, the most successful media promoter in America to do his job differently? But it does say to me that there are ways to do deep, long form conversations, with actual depth. And look, there are hundreds of podcasts that do that. They're not as famous or influential as Joe Rogan's podcast, but they're out there, right? Mark Maron, comedian, would have major political figures. He would also have musicians and comedians. And he would do the reading, and he's finished his podcast now, but like, there's a good example. I have to promote my own podcast that ran for 4 years called Democracy in Danger, where I had a co-host, who was a historian at UVA, and we would invite people, journalists, activists, scholars, who were covering the demise of democracy around the world, everywhere from Poland to Brazil to Argentina to Myanmar, and give them an hour to talk through their experiences, their perspectives, and occasionally start an argument. And that's just one of hundreds of podcasts that do that. That gives me some hope, right? But still, there's so much out there. It's hard to find the good stuff. The good stuff doesn't float easily on social media.
Right. I mean, you look at some of these other people who do long form, like Sean Ryan. He's a former Navy SEAL. He brings on warriors often, and those are quite. They're not really political. They're just talking about experiences none of us have ever had that just involve life and death.
Right.
And I think in terms of people being formed on something like that, I think that's, assuming they're telling the truth, I mean, I'm certain that they are.
Yeah.
Those are quite fascinating. You're not getting, it's not a war movie anymore. It's actually, here's the person who did so-and-so.
Yes,
so you find about Somalia, you find about
a
variety of things, and it's quite something.
But that is the core substance of political engagement. Actual knowledge about the world, knowledge about other people's experiences. And once you start to care about other people's experiences, then you see the world differently. And once you politically engage, you're a different kind of citizen at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. How does social media undermine our ability to deliberate collectively? We're kind of talking about the story, but we can expound if you want. And how does it weaken our democratic norms? Right.
So, all of our social media platforms engage in algorithmic amplification. They choose certain content over other content. It's never a simple left-right thing. And, as Americans, sometimes we assume that the world is arranged on the left-right American partisan scale, but it's not, right? What the scale of algorithmic amplification through social media and through web search is really about the likelihood to generate engagement, clicks, shares, likes, and comments. That's the currency. So Joe Rogan can talk about some really important thing for 3 hours, and his social media presence can cyclically amplify those things, right? All of his fans are highly engaged. They'll put clips up, they'll like and comment, etc. the clips. If he says something, or if one of his guests says something controversial, that the same way, right? That circuit, what it does is it makes all of our conversations shallower. So look, let me give you an example. If I were on Facebook and you're my Facebook friend, and I were to post a story from an article from The Economist about monetary policy in the European Union, a deeply important issue, right? the value of currencies in the European Union right now in an age of high tariffs is really crucial. Affects millions, maybe billions of jobs around the world. It would sink like a rock. None of my Facebook friends would see that in their feeds, because Facebook already knows that those kinds of stories are not likely to generate engagement. Now, you being the sort of person who might actually care about monetary policy in the European Union, that's something Facebook knows about you. So you might be one of my 5 friends who sees that article when you open up your newsfeed.
Right.
And we might then have a little, conversation about it. If I post a picture of my golden retriever, who is the cutest and sweetest golden retriever in the world, then I'm going to instantly get hundreds of comments.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
Because Facebook's already primed to know that all of my friends want to see my dog. Right. And that in general, golden retrievers do great on Facebook. So Facebook's interest is to keep you on Facebook.
Yep.
That's the same for every social media platform, including TikTok. Keep you on, give you more of what you have primed the system to understand about you. Again, this level of surveillance is unbelievable. So they know everything about us. And again, that just means that, how do I want to change minds in the world? I love making people smile with pictures of golden retrievers. At the same time, I wouldn't mind if more people talked about, monetary policy in the European Union once in a while.
Yeah. The other thing is it's not just that they track you when they ask you to follow.
Yeah.
That opens up a whole network. And then you have to follow these other ones. You keep getting these, they keep throwing a fishing line to you to grab that one too and grab that one.
That's it.
Yeah, mushrooms.
Exactly.
It's amazing. So you're an active participant, not just by reading,
Yeah.
but then you click that thing that says follow.
That's why they're socio-technical systems. Facebook is designed, and again, many social media platforms are designed to leverage a social network that already exists.
Yes.
Right. And then to make it real and strong within the network. And that means that's why Facebook is not just something that acts on us. We act on Facebook and we teach Facebook how to behave. But ultimately, Facebook has its own biases, and those biases are towards strong emotions and brevity. And that is just not always great. I mean, look, Socrates told us this, like focusing on the strong emotions is not going to get us the politics we want. Right. Aristotle said the same thing. We've known that for a long time, which is why we build institutions that work against immediate gratification.
Exactly.
Right. So
less a separation of powers.
Exactly. Right. People don't study the Torah for immediate gratification. People don't study the Quran for immediate gratification. People don't study calculus for immediate gratification, right?
It hurts.
They study it and they spend the time and we do it. We invest in these processes, these practices, institutions. We invest money and time in them because we know that the gratification will be largely uncountable, maybe invisible, and definitely deferred. And that's why this focus on efficiency and immediate gratification is not healthy for democracy. I actually don't think it's healthy for the economy. I don't think it's healthy for human bodies. All of these things. We need more investment in the institutions and practices that are about deferred gratification than immediate gratification.
Right. What institutions are least prepared for this moment of technological change, and why?
Wow.
Pick one.
Oh my gosh. How about the Democratic leadership of the U.S. Senate? Such as it is, they seem so checked out and clueless about how to create a message and send it to the country, despite living in this environment for 25 years. I would have said 2 years ago, I might have said like the Catholic Church wasn't really down with this stuff, but the new Pope seems pretty savvy.
He's from the south side of Chicago, by the way.
I think that helps,
My
right?
old neighborhood.
Right.
He's a White Sox fan.
Right, yeah. I think
God bless him.
I think having that Chicago savvy, that sort of streetwiseness is helping that institution connect with messages that resonate in ways that, I've not seen in my lifetime, or at least since, the fall of the Cold War, the liberation of Poland under a Polish pope, right? Those were different moments of communication, right? But no, I think that right now, the Catholic Church is doing better than the Democrats in the U.S. Senate in terms of like connecting and understanding how to facilitate a message. I think unprepared, or unable to respond. A lot of our institutions that I was worried about have responded in the last 25 years. I thought Hollywood was in bigger trouble than it ended up being. I think Hollywood adapted pretty quickly and in many ways mastered and controlled to the point now where, Disney is in no danger of being a less important institution in the world. I think that obviously traditional journalism is floundering still, largely because of poor leadership by people who were supposed to be digitally savvy. I would say, here's an American institution that I think is unable to meet the moment, and that is the legal profession. I worry, for a variety of reasons we don't have time to get into today, that the fundamental principles of rule of law are being dismantled from the top in this country, and the legal profession seems not willing or able to pull a fire alarm, and not willing or able to step up and say, we have core problems. We have really deep problems. That doesn't mean there aren't major, important legal figures of a variety of ideological perspectives who are pulling fire alarms, but as a whole, state bars are not confronting a lot of these deep ethical and frankly constitutional issues that they should be. I think the profession is not policing itself well, and it's facing its greatest pressure maybe since Andrew Jackson was president to really reestablish the rule of law. It flusters me, and I feel sorry for my friends who teach law school right now, because nothing they've been teaching for the last 25 years seems to matter. Right. I mean, at least you as a political scientist still have the politics of the world to study, right? Those issues not gone away. If anything, they've become sharper, more pronounced, more worthy of your attention. But to teach law school right now is just really depressing.
Yeah. Let's look ahead to the 2020 presidential election. What role do you expect social media platforms and AI-driven technologies to play in shaping campaign strategies and voter behavior? Right.
So every 2 years, let alone 4 years, social media is different, right? So Facebook works differently than it did 2 years ago, different than it did 4 years ago, slightly different. So, and that's true of YouTube, that's true of Google, that's true of Twitter/X. All of this has changed just in the last 4 years. So it's hard for me to predict with detail how many of these platforms are going to be used differently in the future. I would say that one of the things we've seen is that AI systems have long been built into these systems, into these platforms, but invisibly, right? So we've had predictive AI influencing the algorithmic amplification and distribution for more than 20 years. They just didn't talk about it. They just slowly built this stuff in, and that's why we'd see things change in our feeds over time. And the gold standard, by the way, is TikTok. TikTok does that surveillance and algorithmic amplification and predictive AI better than any company in the world. That's why there was so much freak out about it.
Yes.
It really wasn't a national security threat. If it were, we would not be inviting the United Arab Emirates to be an investor in it, in TikTok. It was not really about propaganda or surveillance, right? It's not like millions of Americans are going to fall for Chinese propaganda. They really don't have a message that's going to catch on to us. It really was about the fact that the big American AI companies and / social media guy. And they're the same companies. You know, it's Microsoft, it's Meta, it's Amazon, it's Apple, you know, it's Google / Alphabet. Those are the companies that were freaking out about the fact that the best predictive AI in the world was coming from a company that was so close to the government of the People's Republic of China, a market they can't get into, they can't exploit. And they were worried that that was going to undermine their markets around the world, right? That's why they first, in 2020, they urged and they succeeded the government of India to ban TikTok. And that was the first big one, right? So the biggest market in the world, all of a sudden, can't use TikTok. And everybody rushed to Instagram, as one would predict. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg's super happy about that. And he wanted to do the same thing in this country. And as it turned out, President Trump didn't really go along with him. President Biden went along with him. And then President Trump basically completely ignored the law, and thus his oath of office, to dismantle the law about TikTok that would have banned TikTok, and instead forged a deal so his buddies, the Ellisons, get to be major investors in the most powerful predictive AI going forward. How is that going to affect the next presidential election? Well, I mean, let's start with that the Ellisons, very close friends of President Trump, are now basically in control of the fastest growing social media platform in the world, one that has incredible engagement among young voters. Is that going to matter? I don't know. Are young voters even going to want to stick around on TikTok as they make changes to it? I don't know. How much influence are they going to have? I don't know. I worry about that. I worry about the Ellisons, who now control TikTok and CBS News, which matters less and less every day, in terms of their ability to manipulate things for their side. That's not the whole world, though. That's not the total world. In terms of AI, what I worry about more is not what happens in the next election, because we saw in the last 2 years different forms of generative AI show up in different campaigns around the world, in India, in Pakistan, in parts of Eastern Europe. We saw a little bit of it in the last US campaign. It didn't really matter. I don't think that sort of deep fake politics it's going to get a lot of attention. I don't know that it's going to have a lot of influence, because that sort of practice has been around for a long time. It's just a little bit trickier now. Again, much more worried about the long-term corrosive effects of mental and thus political atrophy because of these systems.
Right. How can policymakers approach platform accountability and AI governance? What kind of leaders do we need at all levels of government to ensure communities and democracy thrive?
I mean, I think what we need is more leaders paying attention to the needs of citizens rather than listening to those in the industries. So, for instance, when we think about those who are creating AI policy, when they gather people in a room to imagine what AI policy should be, and this was much more under the Biden administration because they actually executed policy as opposed to mere corruption, which is what's going on now. They would bring in industry leaders and leaders of organizations that are purporting to speak for the public. And then they would negotiate a set of guidelines that would make everybody a little bit happy, right? That's generally how policy is made, right? It's no mystery. It's, that's how we've done all sorts of policy for a century or more. But one of the things I think we make a mistake at is that assuming that what's missing from our political leadership is expertise, right? We expect, people are always saying stuff like, how do you expect these old guys like Mitch McConnell to understand the internet or understand digital technology? And I always look at that. I say, we don't expect our Congress people to understand the catalytic converter, in 1974 when they mandated it. They weren't physicists or engineers understanding but they knew that their staffs and the agencies had done the real deep studies. They listened to the experts, they read reports, and they said, it's probably a good idea to mandate catalytic converter. You didn't have to understand how it works. I support catalytic converters, and I could not tell you how they work, right? So we do that about cars. We do that about electronics. We do that about, regulations to make sure that children's pajamas don't burst into flames, right? So you don't need to understand how digital technology work to understand what they do to people and how to take people seriously when they raise issues about the deleterious effects.
Right. So this is the last question, but it's not really a question. It's asking you, is there something I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
Wow. Optimism, right? Where do we find space for hope, space for optimism? We're speaking in early February of 2026, and there's a lot of turmoil in this country right now, and a lot of tension in this country, and a lot of, violence in the streets that our government officials are in large part responsible for. And it's not an easy time to be optimistic, but I'll tell you, I'm sure you sense it too. What makes me hopeful for the future of the United States is that 20-year-olds get it, right? And it doesn't matter what specific positions they have on issues or on politics. 20-year-olds understand the stakes in ways that 60-year-olds don't seem to. And this has been what I've found my entire career. I've been doing this job for more than 30 years. I have constantly derived hope and optimism from the spirit and curiosity of 20-year-olds, and we have more 20-year-olds than we ever had, Texas itself has more 20-year-olds than any state besides California, has a younger population than any state but California. And so, even though Texas is going through a lot of troubles right now, especially when it comes to its institutions of education, and a lot of those troubles are executed by people our age who, don't seem to have a long-term view of what's best for this state or this country. At some point, these 20-year-olds will be the people in charge, and they are going to want to and have to make up for the mistakes that we made.
Right. Well, Siva Vaidhyanathan, thank you for your insightful comments. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, it's always a good chance to, good to have an opportunity to just roll on about stuff. Yeah.
To our listeners, visit our website and social media platforms for information on upcoming programming. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This podcast represents the views of the guests and not of the University of Houston. Center for Student Media provided sound and engineering support, and Soundcast music provided the podcast song. The series is produced by the Communications and Marketing team at the Hobby School of Public Affairs. For more information on Hobby Talks, including past and upcoming episodes, visit uh.edu/hobby/hobbytalks.